Hello everyone, Mr. Happy here, and welcome to my guide to Thordan's Reign, the rematch against King Thordan and his Knights of the Round. To access this fight, you must first unlock it in Mordona from the NPC Alice after completing the 3.0 main scenario quest, Heavensward. It requires a minimum item level of 190 to enter and drops item level 205 weapons, as well as a helm fragment which can be traded in for a weapon of your choice from the fight once you have 10 of them. This video assumes you have some basic knowledge of the normal mode version of the encounter, plus some of your encounters in the vault, so some mechanics may only be explained in minor detail, but we'll cover most everything. This fight is broken up into 3 major phases, with the second and third major phases consisting of several mini phases. To skip to a specific major phase, please use the annotations in the top left hand of the video. Before the fight begins, place an A marker on the north side of the room, a B marker somewhere on the south side of the room, and a C marker on the southeast side of the room. These aren't too important until later, but just get them down. Thordan's first phase doesn't showcase many new mechanics, but he does hit a lot harder. Quick rundown of the abilities he uses from normal mode in the order they are used. He fires AoEs at everyone in the raid group, which you can stack up and then move out of. He has a giant half-a-room AoE, with the safe spots in between his slashes. He uses Dragon's Gaze, which you need to turn away from in order to avoid gaining a vulnerability stack plus hysteria effect. He marks everyone in the raid with a lightning bolt AoE that requires players to spread out to not do overlapping damage. After the lightning bolt AoE, he'll introduce a new mechanic called Dragon's Rage, which just needs to have its damage split between everyone hit, so just stack up close to each other near Thordan. He'll then use Ancient Quagga before he introduces his new tank buster, Heavenly Heal. This attack wrecks tanks, so ensure to run a defensive cooldown to ensure you survive it. In total, this phase lasts 80 seconds, or just after the Heavenly Heal, but it can end early if you push Thordan to 70%. This makes it possible to skip Heavenly Heal overall, as you see us do in the video. Once Thordan becomes untargetable and walks away, Phase 2 will begin. Phase 2 is basically a harder version of the final phase of Thordan from his normal difficulty. However, the wall of the arena is now covered in fire that will do a lot of damage if you stand in it, so don't get knocked into the wall or walk into it by accident. Thordan's Knights will now take turns trying to destroy you. The first mechanic he brings back are the fire chains from the vault and the Heaven's Flame AoEs that you just need to avoid. Just run away from your chained partner while avoiding the AoEs on the ground. Soon you'll see 4 conviction towers spawn with a small AoE around them. You just need to ensure at least one person is standing in each of them, same mechanic as in turn 13 if you were there for that. If any tower AoE goes off without hitting someone, it'll do raid-wide damage and a nasty paralyze. The good news is if you get the paralyze, you can actually fake harass it with a scholar to remove it from everyone and continue the fight safely. It's not an instant wipe. After that, Sir Zephyrin will appear in the center of the room and begin casting Sacred Cross. When it finishes casting, it will deal damage based on his remaining health, making this a soft DPS check. With decent DPS, you can afford to not use any offensive cooldowns and get his HP to between 20 and 30%, which will still deal about 7k damage, but it's not lethal. If your DPS is lacking, assign 1 or 2 players to use some cooldowns to help push him down a bit faster. Just before Sacred Cross finishes casting, you'll notice 3 knights spawn along the outside of the room. After a few seconds delay, they will dash across the room and murder anything in their path, just like Ifrit charges. The easiest way to dodge this is just look for any nearby knight, and stand on this exact looking spot next to them, the one you see circled on the screen right now. As long as you are directly on this spot in relation to the knight next to you, no matter what kind of pattern they are in, you will be completely safe. Just make sure you are on the line. Next up, we have Sir Adelfel and Sir Janlo, which I'm sure is not how it's pronounced. You'll need to assign each tank to a boss, and have them drag it slightly closer to the wall from where they spawn. They'll both spawn with aggro to the main tank, so ensure your off tank is provoking theirs. A few seconds later, they will both cast Divine Right, and enter either Sword Oath or Shield Oath. The one that has Shield Oath will take less damage, and the one with Sword Oath will deal more damage. Also, if the adds are too close, they'll share these effects with each other, so be sure to keep them apart. Which one enters which oath is random, but after you know which is which, all DPS will want to switch to the Sword Oath target. I'm sure you also have someone in your group that has bad luck like me and always gets the Shield Oath target, so keep that in mind. They'll then both use Holy Blade Dance, which is a massive tank buster. The tank with the Sword Oath buffed boss needs heavy defensive cooldowns, while the Shield Oath tank just needs 1 moderate defensive cooldown. After the Blade Dance, 3 Dragoon Knights will spawn in the center of the room and mark 3 players with blue dive bomb markers in a staggered manner. The marked player will want to run away from the group, as it does higher damage to other players in proximity of the marked target. We have our first marked player run north, our second run south, and our third run north again. Just keep in mind this still deals about 10k damage to the marked player, so heals or mitigation help survive this a lot. While the dive bomb markers are going down, the bosses will cast Divine Right again, which will just switch who has which oath. If you saved offensive cooldowns, it is possible to burn down one of the 2 adds before you even have to deal with this, though it's not mandatory. Just switch targets to the Sword Oath one every time they switch. At this point, they'll use Holiest of Holy, which does about 4k damage to the raid from the Shield Oath boss, but about 8k damage from the Sword Oath boss, so it's a lot of damage. Sucker on the party or Virus on the Sword Oath boss helps with this a lot. Right after that, they'll Holy Blade Dance again, so get your tanks topped off. At this point, it's usually a good idea to start having whoever has the Sword Oath boss to use their super cooldown like Hallowed Ground, Holmgang, or Living Dead. Realistically, you should kill the Knight by the 3rd Holy Blade Dance, if not sooner. At this point, they just keep switching using Holiest of Holy and Holy Blade Dance. They also have a moderate cleave on the tanks that they will use occasionally, so be on the lookout for spike damage. Finish off both bosses to move on to the final set of mechanics for this phase. 3 Dragoon Knights will spawn in the center of the room and mark 3 players with tethers. These players need to make sure not to overlap with any other player, so they'll want to spread out away from each other. That being said, wait until you bait these black puddles out in the center of the room and make sure everyone has a sucker or some sort of mitigation on them, before you have the tethered players run to the north side of the room and spread out. Now this tether deals less damage the farther you are away from the target, so get as close to the wall as possible without stepping into the fire, and the sucker or other shield should be enough to ensure you survive. The attack can also be parried, so things like Keen Flurry or other attacks that resist physical damage can help survive as well. At the same time, the rest of your party will get marked with ice AoEs, and we just spread those out on the south side of the room. They leave behind frostbite AoEs, so be sure to move out of them after they've exploded. Immediately get back in the center of the room and have everyone stand just slightly north of the knight that's standing there. This will make him knock everybody back, and luckily, you set it up so the entire north side of the room is safe from ice puddles. After that knockback, you'll be tasked with killing several comet circles and a meteor circle before they hit the ground. Also, comet AoEs will barrage players like prey markers on the oppressor. They do splash damage, so make sure comet marked players are spread out and get a couple of heals. Other than that, dodge the AoE on the ground and kill as many comet circles as possible before killing off the meteor circle. It's okay to leave a single comet circle up and just refocus the meteor circle if you have to. It only does about 8k raid damage. After you kill the meteor circle, Thordan will begin preparing Ultimate End, which knocks you back a bunch of times before he deals massive damage to the raid. This damage is based on the limit break bar of your duty list, which goes up the longer you took in the previous phase, or if anyone died. Just mitigate it with your standard raid tools, and you'll move on to the final phase. The final phase is broken up into several mini-phases, each designated by the boss casting Dragon's Eye. When he uses this ability now, an eye will appear in a random spot along the outside of the arena. This acts as a second point from which you can be hit by Dragon's Gaze, so when he casts that, you now have to ensure you aren't facing either Thordan or this extra eye. The first one always seems to be north, but the rest will be random and require the group to readjust to its location. I prefer pulling Thordan to the center of the room and having the main tank simply turn Thordan towards the eye. This means that most people just have to turn away from Thordan in order to avoid the gaze, while the tank can either look left or right, or just run through the boss to the other side before moving back into position. It's also very efficient to pull Thordan all the way to the wall where the eye is located, as it gives the party more room to mess with mechanics, but it'll really be up to you which one you do. After casting Dragon's Eye, Thordan will follow up by casting Knights of the Round, with each subsequent Knights of the Round executing different mechanics. The first Knights of the Round will mark a healer, and after a short delay, 2 Knights will charge at them and stun them. Then another Knight will appear in the center of the room and begin throwing a lance at them. This lance's damage functions similar to Amjagud's Wild Charge from turn 10 of Coil. Basically, it deals split damage with everyone it hits, and hits the first target much harder, as well as giving them physical defense down. This means that everyone needs to form a line between the Knight in the middle of the room and the stunned healer, with the off tank being the first target the lance hits. They'll need to pop a defensive cooldown in order to safely survive this hit. Now, if anyone dies to the lance, doesn't matter who it is, the knight will follow up with a 90k hit to the entire raid, so it's an instant wipe. Oh, and people will also get the infirmity debuff for a short time, but this hardly matters, there's not really any raid damage right after. As the knight is charging his lance, the main tank will also get hit by Heavenly Heal, which I just need to mitigate. After all of this, the boss will cast Dragon's Gaze, so look away from the eye and Thordan. After an Ancient Quagga, he will go into his second Dragon's Eye. After the second Dragon's Eye, readjust to the new eye location and prepare for the next Knights of the Round. This time there will be 4 Conviction Towers, gradual ground AoEs, and a Dragon's Gaze all at the same time. Look away from the eyes, dodge the red ground AoE, and ensure that each conviction hits at least one person. If you're nervous about dodging the red ground AoE and getting your tower, just know that the first hit coincides with Dragon's Gaze and the second hit coincides with the tower explosion, so you can safely dodge the first hit and the gaze and make it back into the tower in time. After the Conviction Towers, a bunch of black puddles will spawn and Thordan will mark a player with Dragon's Rage. After the black puddles disappear, everyone stack in the middle of the room and get knocked back in the same direction. This should ensure you all split the Dragon's Rage. Just make sure to stay stacked until Dragon's Rage deals its damage. There's a cleave very shortly after that rage, so the tank may want to reposition a few seconds early to keep him facing away from the party. Now for the third Dragon's Eye, and this is probably the hardest one in the entire fight, though he actually doesn't use Dragon's Gaze during this one, so you can ignore the eye location. When Thordan casts Knights of the Round, everyone spread out to avoid overlapping with the lightning AoEs. Now a knight will spawn on the outside of the room and dash through the middle like the 3 knights did earlier, so locate him quickly. This is where our B and C markers come into play. If his path doesn't intersect with B, we go there. If it does, we all go to C instead. So locate him while the lightning AoE is casting and without hesitation immediately run to the correct marker. Once you're there, a player will get a blue dive bomb marker and need to get out of the group. Another player will also get a tether and need to do the same. We have each marked player go either left or right of B or C while ensuring they don't intersect with the dashing knight. Everyone else at B will be splitting Dragon's Rage. After the Rage, there will be a Heavenly Heal, so be ready to mitigate it. Now in the video you see we have B and C closer to the wall, and this is kind of out of habit with the Ifrit charges and the way we did them back in the second major phase. That being said, you really don't need to move all the way to the wall. It's safer to have B and C much closer to the middle of the room. All that's important is that you don't intersect with the knight. This may make movements easier, and it may make it so people have an easier time getting away from the marked targets as well. It also ensures that people can continue to DPS Thordan even while doing the Dragon's Rage mechanic, since he stops and starts casting it, and going all the way to the wall may lose you a bit of DPS. After Dragon's Eye, he will cast Knights of the Round for the 4th time. For this one, there will be 3 Comet markers on players, just like the one from the Comet Circle phase, Heaven's Flame AoEs to dodge, as well as chains that need to be broken. He will use Gaze here, so break the chains while looking away from Thordan and the Eye. He will then mark players with Ice AoEs that need to not overlap, as well as the giant Sword Slash AoE from the first phase. It's mostly just break the chains, dodge the AoEs, but the amount of particle effects on the screen can make it pretty hard to see, so try your best to pay close attention. After the slash, he will use Quagga, then a Heavenly Heal, and then another Quagga, so some quick healing and mitigation help a lot here. For the 5th Dragon's Eye, it has very few mechanics. I just recommend pulling Thordan about halfway between the center of the room and the new Dragon's Eye. A bunch of knights just keep popping up and doing massive AoE damage to the raid pretty much, so staying grouped and using tons of AoE heals, mitigations like Soil, and personal healing cooldowns like Second Wind can help a lot here. After the 3rd jumping knight lands, Sir Zephyrin will appear and tether to Thordan, making him invincible. He will then begin casting Sacred Cross, which acts the same as before. However, a bunch of knights will continue to spawn and deal massive AoE damage, so people need to be kept at high HP, basically topped off, pretty much at all times. About 20% before Sacred Cross finishes, Thordan will use Dragon's Gaze. Now if you have him halfway between the Eye and Sir Zephyrin, and all of your players are standing right behind King Thordan, then they don't need to turn it all and can just continue to DPS Zephyrin. After Zephyrin disappears, the rest of the fight is pretty much tank and spank. Thordan will use an Ancient Quagga, a Heavenly Heal, and then continually cleave the tank until you hit the 11-minute mark in the fight. At this point, he will begin slow casting Ancient Quagga that will instantly kill the party when it finishes casting. Use this last 30 or 40 seconds before he enrages to burst out whatever remaining health he has, and congratulations, you've avenged Hoshfon. Again. Thank you Rin Chen Now for contributing the footage you see here, as I was unable to procure it myself. Be sure to check out their Twitch information in the description of the video below. Thank you for watching my guide to Thordan Extreme, or Thordan's Reign, whatever you want to call it. I would like to say here at the end that this is far from the only strategy, and there are so many correct ways to do this fight. If you see an idea somewhere, maybe on Reddit, the official forums, or on any other website that also works, see what works best for your raid group. Sometimes not every strategy is the perfect one. But anyway, thank you again for watching. Be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share, and I will see you all in the next guide in the next video. Until then, take care.